Do you know that there are wounds in Africa that no medicine can heal? Wounds caused not by colonizers with guns, but by African presidents in suits, leaders who wave flags of independence while secretly kneeling before Europe and the West. These wounds are deeper than slavery and bloodier than war. They are wounds of betrayal. Across the continent, in presidential palaces from Dakar to Nairobi, a quiet tragedy unfolds. Men elected to serve the people have become custodians of foreign interest. They wear African skin, but carry European minds. They speak of progress, but sign contracts that drain our land. They claim sovereignty, yet host foreign troops, accept IMF loans, and sell natural wealth in the name of development, while their own people sleep hungry. This is not history, it's happening right now. As Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger rise to reclaim their dignity, these leaders remain silent. Worse, they side with the oppressors. They ignore the cries of their youth, the hunger of their farmers, and the dreams of Pan-African unity. Their loyalty is not to Africa, it is to Paris, London, Brussels, and Washington. In this episode of Black Stories Untold, we reveal 16 African leaders who have become modern-day puppets, chosen by the people but controlled by the empire. Men who care more about foreign applause than African lives. This is not to shame, but to awaken, because until we name the ones silently enslaving us, we will never be free. 1. Alassane Ouattara, the banker who guarded France's treasure. Status, still in power. President of Côte d'Ivoire since 2011. In the land of cocoa and courage, once blessed by ancestral drums and warriors who defied invaders, now stands a polished technocrat, Alassane Ouattara. A man dressed in Western elegance, fluent in the language of finance and diplomacy, but whose hands are whispered by many to carry the ghosts of submission. Ouattara is not a tyrant with clenched fists. He is far more dangerous, a leader whose betrayal wears a silk tie. Since 2011, he has presided over Côte d'Ivoire, rising to power not solely through the people's will, but through the force of French military intervention. When the nation bled in post-election chaos, it was French bombs, not ballots, that crowned him. And from that moment, his loyalty was no longer to the soil of Africa, but to the architects of France-Afrique. They call him an economist, a reformer. But reform came at a cost too steep to measure. Under Ouattara, the CFA franc, France's colonial currency, still chains the Ivorian economy to the coffers of Paris. The banks smile, the stock markets applaud, but the cocoa farmers, those whose hands feed the world, still sleep hungry. Foreign corporations mine, farm, and sell Ivorian riches, while the children of the land inherit only shadows. His alliance with France is not silent, it is proud. French troops operate freely in Côte d'Ivoire. French businesses are protected like sacred temples. And when the cry for Pan-African unity rises, from Mali, from Burkina Faso, from the fire of Ibrahim Traoré, Ouattara responds with silence or scorn. He said nothing when ECOWAS threatened to invade Mali and Niger for choosing their own destinies. He said nothing when his youth took to the streets to protest his third term. Instead, they were met with batons, bullets, and the bitter taste of democracy betrayed. For in Ouattara's court, democracy ends where France's interests begin. And yet he rules still, firm, well-spoken, applauded in Paris, respected in Washington. But to the youth of Africa, his legacy is a cautionary tale, that an African face is not always a Pan-African heart. That progress promised in foreign tongues is often just poverty polished in gold ink. Ouattara still walks the corridors of power, but the soil remembers. And one day, when the drums of resistance rise again, his name may stand not with the liberators, but among those who wore chains too gently to feel their weight. 2. Paul Biya, the monarch of silence and servitude. Status: still in power, President of Cameroon since 1982, one of the world's longest-serving leaders. There is a name whispered through the rainforests of Cameroon, not with reverence, but with fatigue. A name that feels eternal, like a shadow that never moves, a silence that never breaks. That name is Paul Biya, a man who has ruled not with fire or vision, but with the cold persistence of colonial continuity, a relic of a system designed not to uplift, but to sustain obedience. Since 1982, Paul Biya has occupied the highest office in Cameroon. And yet, for much of his rule, he has not governed, he has watched. From Switzerland, from gilded palaces, from behind layers of bureaucracy and foreign alliances, the people chant in the streets, "Nous sommes fatigués," we are tired. But Biya remains unmoved, as if he were not a man, but a monument to an era Africa has tried so hard to bury. Under Biya, the French presence has flourished. The economy still bows to the CFA franc. French companies still extract timber, oil and resources. The military collaborates silently with foreign advisors. And though the chains have changed color, their weight is unchanged. Cameroon's sovereignty, in name only, lies in the hands of a man whose true loyalty seems to reside in the corridors of Paris, not Yaoundé. And what of the Anglophone crisis? What of the young voices from Buea, Bamenda and Kumba crying for recognition, for equality, for justice? Biya's answer has been brutal. Thousands displaced, countless dead. Entire towns gripped by fear and silence, and all the while Biya remains absent. A president without a presence, letting violence fester while the West looks away, unwilling to challenge a leader who keeps French interests intact. He does not speak for the oppressed. He does not rise for Africa's new wave of revolution. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger rejected neo-colonialism, Biya stood silent, his heart still tethered to the old alliances. While Ibrahim Traoré awakened a generation, Biya slept, lulled by the lullabies of imperialism. To the youth of Cameroon, Biya represents not leadership but decay, a stillness that suffocates, a silence that screams louder than any dictator's roar. His face may not strike terror, but it evokes something deeper: betrayal. The betrayal of a people who waited for change and were given only chains painted gold. And still, he clings to power. But the trees whisper, the streets remember, and one day the nation will speak again, not in French, not in fear, but in freedom. 3. Macky Sall, the smiling sentinel of French interests. Status: no longer in power. Stepped down in 2024, succeeded by Bassirou Diomaye Faye. In the streets of Dakar, where the drums once echoed with the pride of independence and the songs of hope poured through the veins of the youth, a cold silence has lingered for over a decade. That silence was the legacy of Macky Sall, a man who began as a servant of the people, but ended as a gatekeeper of European interests. He came to power in 2012, wrapped in the language of reform and renewal. He spoke softly, like a man who listened. He smiled often, like a man who cared. But behind that smile, a system of control was fortified, one that deepened Senegal's submission to France and Western powers, even as the people marched for dignity. Macky Sall ruled with calm efficiency. He strengthened institutions, but not for the people. Instead, he built a wall of law around himself and his allies. French companies flourished under his watch. The CFA franc, a colonial relic, remained untouched. Western diplomats clapped, while Senegal's youth stared into a future of unemployment, censorship, and exile. When the people resisted, when voices like Ousmane Sonko rose to challenge the neo-colonial machine, Macky Sall responded with courts and tear gas. Streets once filled with music and protest became battlefields. Activists were jailed. The internet was silenced. And the president, once a symbol of hope, became the architect of repression. But it was his foreign alliances that revealed the depth of his betrayal. France remained a trusted partner. Foreign troops were welcomed. International Monetary Fund advisors whispered policy. And when Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger stood up, when their youth declared enough, Macky Sall stood with ECOWAS, threatening sanctions and military intervention to preserve the very chains they were breaking. He had the chance to speak for Africa, to side with the youth, to rise like Nkrumah, Sékou Touré or Sankara. But he chose instead to walk the marbled halls of European diplomacy, praised not for defending Africans, but for keeping Africa obedient. Now he is no longer in power, having stepped down peacefully in 2024. His name is remembered, by some with admiration, but by many with disappointment. For he could have been a liberator. Instead, he became a well-spoken warden, guarding the colonial vault, dressed in democratic robes. But Senegal has turned a new page. The winds are shifting. The youth have not forgotten. And history will judge not just what Macky Sall did, but what he refused to become. 4. Patrice Talon, the merchant who silenced the drums of Dahomey. Status: still in power. President of Benin since 2016. In the ancient land of Dahomey, where queens once led armies and kings stood tall against colonial swords, a new ruler reigns, not with spears, but with spreadsheets. Patrice Talon, the business magnate turned president, presents himself as a modernizer, a reformist. But beneath his tailored suits and calculated speeches lies a chilling truth. He governs as a custodian of Europe's economic grip on West Africa. Talon is no fiery dictator. He doesn't shout. He doesn't wave flags. Instead, he operates like a quiet wind, one that erodes sovereignty inch by inch behind the veil of development. His rise from cotton magnate to president was hailed by the West as a success story. But in Benin's villages, that success rarely trickled down. Since taking office in 2016, Talon has implemented reforms that, on the surface, sound noble: digital transformation, judicial modernization, public service overhaul. Yet behind these polished headlines, the people saw their freedoms narrow and their voices silenced. Protesters were jailed. Opposition parties were neutered. Elections became tightly choreographed dances, democracy stripped of its soul. And still, France smiled. Talon's loyalty to the CFA franc is unbroken. A currency controlled in Paris, born from colonial conquest, still governs Benin's economy. French corporations enjoy easy access to land, contracts, and influence. Cultural autonomy is spoken of, but never asserted. And when cries for economic independence echo from Mali, Burkina Faso, or Guinea, Talon offers no solidarity, only silence. He is the perfect partner for Europe, stable, calm, obedient. While others defy colonial ghosts, Talon walks beside them. When ECOWAS prepared sanctions against nations seeking freedom, he stood with them, not as a brother of Africa, but as a quiet servant of external masters. His vision of development is one where Benin looks outward for permission and inward only for compliance. Even worse, he has reshaped the political arena so that resistance becomes not just dangerous, but structurally impossible. Activists are surveilled, judges are pressured, media voices walk cautiously, knowing one wrong word could cost them everything. And all the while, Talon's face appears on glossy reports of African success funded by foreign think tanks. To the youth of Benin, his legacy feels like a betrayal by calculation. He may not scream, but his silence toward African liberation is deafening. He may not wear a crown, but he has become a king in the palace of submission, a servant ruling on behalf of strangers. The drums of Dahomey once summoned the fiercest of warriors. Today, those drums are muted, but not forever. Africa is stirring again, and when those drums beat once more, no president, however polished, will escape their thunder. 5. Mohamed Bazoum, the fallen guardian of uranium chains. Status: no longer in power, deposed by military coup in July 2023. In the vast desert plains of Niger, where the sun scorches the earth and children dig for hope among stones, a quiet storm was brewing for decades. Not in the sky, but in the hearts of a people who had grown weary of leaders who spoke French when they should have spoken fire. Mohamed Bazoum was the last chapter of that long betrayal, a man who ruled not for Niger, but for those who fed on her silence. He came to power in 2021, welcomed by the West as a beacon of stability in a region that dared to rebel. He smiled for cameras, shook hands with Macron, and signed deals that kept France's uranium supply safe, even as his own people sat in darkness. Niger powers France's nuclear lights, yet its own villages live in shadows. Bazoum was no dictator in the classical sense. He did not thunder like Mobutu or declare lifelong presidencies. But he did something far worse. He obeyed, quietly, consistently, without shame. Under his leadership, French troops were given sanctuary, American drone bases expanded, and multinational contracts swallowed Niger's resources whole. To the outside world, he was a democrat. To Nigerians, he was the man who locked their nation in a cage with a foreign key. While young Pan-Africanists demanded freedom, Bazoum demanded patience. He never condemned the CFA franc, never raised his voice for Mali, Burkina Faso, or Guinea. And when Ibrahim Traoré rose like a lion, Bazoum stood with ECOWAS, calling for intervention to restore colonial order in the name of democracy. But Niger had had enough. On July 26, 2023, the soldiers moved, calmly, decisively. They entered his palace, unhooked him from the foreign wires, and declared Niger's sovereignty not with papers, but with posture. The world gasped, France panicked, the West screamed coup, but to the youth of Niger, it was a correction. Now Bazoum sits in quiet detention, not forgotten, but remembered as the man who chose uranium contracts over hungry mouths, who chose applause in Brussels over justice in Niamey. His fall was not just political, it was spiritual. A final warning to all African leaders who forget that the land speaks, and when it does, it will no longer tolerate whispering slaves in royal suits. 6. Paul Kagame, the general who chose the gun over the voice. Status: still in power, President of Rwanda since 2000. In the mist-covered hills of Rwanda, a land once shattered by one of the darkest chapters in human history, rose a man who vowed to never let it happen again. Paul Kagame was that man, a general, a strategist, a redeemer to many. He brought order where there was chaos, silence where there had been screams. But in his pursuit of strength, he chose a path that now binds him, not to his people, but to powers beyond the continent. Since officially taking office in 2000, Kagame has ruled Rwanda with precision and discipline, like a military operation that never ended. In the eyes of the West, he is a shining light. Clean streets, efficient governance, fast-growing GDP, a high-tech Singapore of Africa. But behind the gleaming towers lies a darker truth. Kagame's Rwanda is a fortress, one whose walls keep out not just enemies, but criticism, dissent, and Pan-African solidarity. His government has been accused of crushing opposition, intimidating journalists, and exiling critics. And all of it is done with the quiet approval of Western governments, who see in Kagame a valuable ally. The UK, the US, and even France, once Rwanda's colonial oppressor, have all cozied up to him. They fund development, sign military pacts, and praise his leadership, even as civil liberties shrink by the day. Kagame, the soldier who once led the Rwandan Patriotic Front to liberate his people, has now become a custodian of Western interests in Central and Eastern Africa. He has sent troops to Mozambique, to CAR, to South Sudan, not just in the name of peace, but often in alignment with NATO objectives. He serves not as a rebel of the empire, but as one of its most elite soldiers. When the Sahel nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, rose in rebellion against neo-colonialism, Kagame stood apart. No words of support, no Pan-African fire, only cold diplomacy. He does not raise his voice for Ibrahim Traoré, nor does he invoke the legacy of Thomas Sankara or Amilcar Cabral. For Kagame, unity must be controlled, ordered, and sanctioned by global partners, not ignited by the raw energy of the African people. To many Rwandans, Kagame is both a protector and a prison warden. To Pan-Africanists, he is a paradox, the liberator turned loyalist, the lion who became a silent gatekeeper. Rwanda may be clean, but its voice is clipped. Its peace is not organic, it is imposed. And so, as Kagame continues to lead, he must face the growing truth. Africa is awakening, and no matter how efficient a fortress may be, it cannot silence the storm forever. 7. Faure Gnassingbé, the prince of a dynasty that bowed to Paris. Status: still in power. President of Togo since 2005, son of former ruler Gnassingbé Eyadema. In the quiet nation of Togo, nestled along the Gulf of Guinea, a dynasty endures. Not one born of revolutionary fire, nor one anointed by the collective will of the people, but one preserved by foreign hands and quiet repression. At the head of this dynasty stands Faure Gnassingbé, a man who inherited more than a presidency. He inherited a contract with colonial ghosts. His father, Gnassingbé Eyadema, ruled Togo for 38 years with an iron grip and an open hand to France. And when he died in 2005, it was Faure, groomed in the West and trained in the language of submission, who rose to power not through a people's call, but through a military appointment later polished by a heavily disputed election. From that moment on, Faure became more than a president. He became a symbol of continuity for France's quiet empire in West Africa. He speaks calmly, smiles modestly, and attends international summits with grace. But beneath that grace lies a legacy of obedience. Togo remains shackled to the CFA franc, the colonial currency designed by France to extract wealth from its former colonies without the cost of occupation. French companies still dominate key sectors. French troops still enjoy access, and all the while, the average Togolese citizen walks through the ruins of forgotten dreams. When youth rose in protest, calling for term limits, justice, and real democracy, Faure met them not with dialogue, but with tear gas and bullets. When Pan-African movements surged across the region, he stood silent. When Ibrahim Traoré called for the unity of Africa against Western control, Faure looked the other way. He is not a leader of the African Renaissance. He is a butler in the House of Empire, polite and obedient, guarding the gates against his own people's liberation. Togo has remained unusually quiet amidst the storms sweeping West Africa. No revolutionary voices from the palace, no defiance of colonial systems, no break from the chains that have held the country since independence. Because silence is the currency of favor in neo-colonial politics, and Faure spends it well. To the elders of Togo, he is a reminder of what never changed. To the youth, he is the weight they must still lift. And to history, he may be remembered not as a builder, but as the final chapter of a dynasty that mistook power for loyalty and forgot that even the smallest nation holds the soul of Africa's fight. 8. Felix Tshisekedi, the quiet caretaker of Congo's stolen wealth. Status: still in power. President of the Democratic Republic of Congo since January 2019. In the heart of Africa lies a land so rich the soil bleeds copper, cobalt, gold, and diamonds. A land that could feed its people 1,000 times over. And yet it starves. The Democratic Republic of Congo is both a miracle and a mystery, wounded by centuries of extraction, colonization, and war. At its helm now sits Felix Tshisekedi, a man whose rise brought hope, but whose rule has become a quiet echo of old betrayals. Tshisekedi was the son of Etienne Tshisekedi, a lifelong opposition leader who stood against Mobutu's dictatorship. His father's legacy stirred hope in millions. When Felix took office in 2019, after a controversial electoral alliance with the outgoing regime of Joseph Kabila, many believed the son would finish what the father began. But what unfolded was not revolution, it was realignment. Under Tshisekedi's leadership, Congo remains an open field for foreign plunder. Western companies, especially from the US, France, and Belgium, continue to harvest the nation's cobalt and lithium used in the phones and electric cars of the modern world, while Congolese children dig in dangerous mines for pennies. Multinational giants grow richer, Congo's youth grow restless, and still the president extends his hand to the very forces profiting from his people's pain. He has signed partnerships with French and Belgian companies, embraced World Bank policies, and traveled with pride to Paris and Brussels. Congo's sovereignty, though rich in rhetoric, continues to be bartered in boardrooms far from Kinshasa. French influence, once driven by whip and rifle, now comes dressed in economic forums and diplomatic smiles, and Tshisekedi has become its polite host. When the fires of Pan-African rebellion were lit in the Sahel, Tshisekedi offered no applause, no solidarity, no resistance to the ECOWAS sanctions, no standing ovation for Ibrahim Traoré, no defense of Thomas Sankaра's legacy. His silence on Africa's awakening has been deafening. Even as Rwanda is accused of fueling violence in Congo's eastern provinces and minerals leave the country unchecked, Tshisekedi's responses are either delayed, diluted, or conveniently diplomatic, ensuring he remains a trusted partner in the eyes of Europe and America. To the people of Congo, his leadership now feels like a betrayal sewn in velvet. He does not oppress with brutality, but with accommodation. He does not roar, but he does not resist. And in a land where Patrice Lumumba once gave his life for freedom, such silence is treason in slow motion. Tshisekedi still sits in the presidential chair, but the ground beneath it trembles. Because Congo's soul, too long buried under blood and greed, is beginning to rise. And when it does, no man will be able to govern both the people and their chains. 9. Hakainde Hichilema, the economist who sat at the IMF's table. Status: still in power. President of Zambia since August 2021. Zambia once danced to the rhythm of copper, its red earth full of promise, its mountains echoing the voices of proud workers who dared to believe in African dignity. But in recent years, those songs have faded. In their place, contracts were signed, austerity plans were drawn, and the scent of foreign ink smothered the breath of the people. In this new era stands Hakainde Hichilema, a man whose name once brought hope, but now hangs in the balance between servant of sovereignty and steward of global finance. He came to power in 2021, following years of struggle as an opposition figure. He spoke of reforms, of restoring dignity, of ending corruption. And the people believed. They flooded the streets in celebration, chanting the name of a man who knew hardship and promised prosperity. But soon, the winds shifted. And those winds carried the voice of the International Monetary Fund. Hichilema, a businessman by training, embraced the IMF with open arms. He welcomed debt restructuring plans that many saw as traps wrapped in golden ribbons. He cut subsidies on fuel, on electricity, calling it necessary discipline. But to the mother who walks 10 kilometers for water, it was not discipline, but abandonment. Prices soared, jobs vanished. And as the people cried for relief, Hichilema spoke of macroeconomics, of foreign investor confidence, in a language foreign to suffering ears. In the corridors of Washington, he is celebrated. In the halls of Davos, he is praised. But on the streets of Lusaka and Livingstone, he is questioned. Whose interests does he serve? While Mali and Burkina Faso rejected foreign dictates, Hichilema signed new agreements. While Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood in defiance of France, Hichilema posed with IMF officials. While Sankara's flame is reigniting across the continent, he chooses diplomacy with the West over unity with Africa's rising voices. He has not jailed opposition en masse. He has not muzzled the press with blood. But he has shackled his nation with economic policies designed abroad, measured not in human dignity, but in balance sheets and bondholder approval. To the youth of Zambia, he now stands at a crossroads. Will he be the reformer who bends for Europe, or the liberator who breaks the chains? Will he rise and remember Kenneth Kaunda's dream, or will he become another name in the long list of African leaders who exchanged applause in London for truth in Lusaka? For now, Hichilema still walks freely, still leads, but freedom is not what the West grants. It is what the people demand. And soon, he must choose. Stand with the IMF or stand with Africa. 10. William Ruto, the hustler who knelt before the empire. Status, still in power, President of Kenya since September 2022. They called him the hustler, a man of the people, a man who rose from selling chickens on dusty roads to occupying the highest seat in the land. William Ruto promised to break dynasties, to challenge old powers, and to return Kenya to the hands of its people. But now, barely 3 years into his presidency, many ask, did he rise to serve the hustlers, or to protect the hands that have always fed off Africa's bones? Ruto came to power in 2022, backed by the weary hope of millions who believed they had found a leader who understood their struggle. He spoke of bottom-up economics, of fighting inequality, of uplifting the ordinary citizen. But those words have faded into the echo chambers of global finance, drowned beneath handshakes in Washington, military deals with the United States, and trade agreements skewed toward those who colonized with flags and now colonize with contracts. Under Ruto's rule, Kenya has welcomed US military presence and strategic partnerships. In 2024, he signed a security deal allowing American forces greater access to Kenyan soil. While the youth of Burkina Faso burn foreign flags and reclaim their futures, Ruto unfurls the red carpet for the Pentagon, nodding to press conferences that frame imperialism as partnership. His government has chased foreign investors with zeal, offering tax holidays and deregulated environments, while Kenyan farmers, students, and laborers continue to suffocate under inflation and economic pressure. Debt has ballooned. The IMF whispers loudly in Nairobi, and the West applauds, not because Ruto defied them, but because he bent so gracefully. And what of Pan-African unity? What of Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, or Traoré? Ruto does not speak their names. He does not align with their fire. When Niger was sanctioned, when Mali stood defiant, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before the world and called for African youth to rise, Ruto remained quiet, diplomatic and distant, afraid perhaps to upset the Western partners who now see him as East Africa's reliable ally. To the youth of Kenya, the dream is souring. The man who rose from struggle seems now more comfortable among global elites than in Mathare, Kibera, or Eldoret. He talks about climate finance in Dubai, while Nairobi floods and rural communities starve. He speaks of investments, while Boda riders beg for fuel subsidies. William Ruto may still wear the crown, but the people are watching, and soon they may ask the same question others in West Africa have asked before taking destiny into their own hands. Are we free, or are we simply well-managed slaves in digital chains? 11. Cyril Ramaphosa, the negotiator who guarded the House of Capital. Status: still in power, President of South Africa since 2018. When the sun rose over a liberated South Africa in 1994, it did not rise alone. It was lifted by the hands of miners, mothers, poets and prisoners, by the blood and courage of a people who had fought for decades to breathe in a land that had tried to bury them alive. In those days, names like Mandela, Tambo and Biko lived not only in history books, but in hearts. South Africa was free, or so they believed. And then came the slow, quiet betrayal. At the center of that betrayal stands Cyril Ramaphosa, once a union leader, once a negotiator at the table where the apartheid regime handed over power. Now, President of South Africa since 2018. A polished corporate statesman, a man more likely to shake hands with CEOs than to march alongside the workers he once led. Ramaphosa's rise was strategic. He became a billionaire through the very structures built by apartheid, benefiting from black economic empowerment programs that handed select individuals shares in white-owned companies while leaving the black working class behind. Under his presidency, the people see continuity, not transformation. Land remains in the hands of descendants of colonizers. Mines still bleed with the sweat of the poor. The shacks still rise like scars on the edges of cities, while luxury estates bloom in protected zones. And while the rhetoric of justice is performed on stages and in speeches, the reality is silence. Ramaphosa's South Africa does not speak against France's role in West Africa. It does not defend Ibrahim Traoré or the vision of Thomas Sankara. It remains neutral in times when Africa needs conviction, not cowardice. Pan-African unity is whispered at summits, but not lived in action. He has kept South Africa tethered to the economic structures of the West, relying on IMF advice, courting American and European investments, and refusing to nationalize key sectors as once envisioned by the Freedom Charter. He governs a nation birthed in revolution as though it were a corporate boardroom, quiet, calculated, risk-averse. To the youth of Soweto, Khayelitsha and Umlazi, Ramaphosa represents a system that never truly decolonized, a leader who sat at the table of freedom and negotiated away the fire. He wears the suit of liberation, but his steps echo in marble halls where justice is deferred. And yet, the earth beneath South Africa trembles. The youth are stirring. They speak again of Biko. They remember Chris Hani. They call on Sankara, and they ask if those who once negotiated their future are now negotiating their silence. Cyril Ramaphosa is still in power, but the people are beginning to remember what power truly looks like, and it does not wear a pinstripe suit. It carries the voice of the people, and that voice is rising again. 12th, Nana Akufo-Addo, the orator who spoke of freedom, then sat in silence. Status: no longer in power, served as president of Ghana from 2017 to 2025. Once, in the halls of African politics, a voice echoed with strength and eloquence. It was the voice of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, well-spoken, confident, Pan-African in tone. He wore the cloth of the ancestors, walked boldly before European leaders, and declared, "We are beyond aid." Ghana, the land of Kwame Nkrumah, had seemingly found a son who remembered. But behind that powerful voice, behind the elegant speeches, something tragic unfolded. For while the world applauded his words, his deeds often betrayed the very soul of Ghana's revolutionary legacy. Akufo-Addo ruled from 2017 to 2025, completing his 2 terms as enshrined in Ghana's constitution. He came into office on a wave of national pride. Ghanaians hoped he would rise above party politics and lead a renaissance of Pan-African values. Instead, they watched as their nation slid further into the grip of foreign control, economic, military, and ideological. In 2018, a defense cooperation agreement with the United States handed over Ghanaian soil to American military interests. American troops were granted access to facilities, diplomatic immunity, and operational freedom. For many, it was a chilling echo of the colonial past, a surrender wrapped in legality. Streets filled with protesters, students raised placards, but the agreement remained. Ghana, the Black Star of Africa, became a silent stronghold for foreign power. When economic storms hit, Akufo-Addo turned not inward but outward, to the IMF again, to the World Bank. Loans poured in, and with them, austerity. Fuel prices rose, taxes multiplied, public anger grew. Ghana's wealth, its gold, bauxite, and oil, continued to enrich foreign corporations, while the people were told to tighten their belts for a better tomorrow that never came. But perhaps the greatest disappointment was his silence. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger threw off the yoke of France, Akufo-Addo did not raise a fist in solidarity. He did not defend Ibrahim Traoré. He did not speak against the CFA franc. Instead, he joined ECOWAS threats of intervention, side by side with France, against fellow Africans fighting for sovereignty. To the youth of Ghana, he became a symbol of lost opportunity, a leader who could have rekindled Nkrumah's dream, but chose diplomatic comfort over continental courage. His term ended in January 2025, and he walked away, not disgraced, but not celebrated either. He left behind a Ghana that still hungered for true independence. Now, John Mahama has returned to power, vowing to walk a different path. But the echoes of Akufo-Addo's era remain in every closed factory, every foreign contract, every young Ghanaian who asks, why must we beg in our own land? History will remember him, not for what he said, but for what he refused to fight for when it mattered most. 13. Mohamed Al-Menfi, the hostage of foreign thrones. Status: still in office, chairman of Libya's Presidential Council since March 2021. Once a gateway of African pride, Libya now breathes in fragments. Its people scattered, its cities scarred, and its sovereignty traded like a currency among foreign powers. From the ashes of Gaddafi's fall rose not liberation, but a battlefield of interests, where oil and geopolitics clash more than tribes or ideologies. And amid this fractured nation stands Mohamed Al-Menfi, not as a leader, but as a figurehead pinned by foreign stakes. Appointed in March 2021 as head of Libya's Transitional Presidential Council, Al-Menfi was introduced to the world not through revolutionary fire, but through a UN-sponsored negotiation table, one attended by diplomats from Europe, the Gulf, and the United States. They called it progress, but many Libyans saw it as a handover, not to one man, but to an invisible assembly of foreign puppeteers. Al-Menfi walks gently, speaks diplomatically, and plays the role of unity broker. But he holds no real power. The country remains split, east under General Haftar's grip, west under fragile government structures, and the south teetering in neglect. And through it all, foreign boots and corporations dig deeper. France, Italy, the UAE, Turkey, and even Russia, each carving their interest in Libya's dying breath. Libya's oil, its cursed blessing, continues to flow, not to rebuild Tripoli or restore Benghazi, but to fill European reserves and fund proxy wars. The people see it. They see the foreign embassies growing larger while their schools collapse. They see gas lines in an oil-rich country. They see the Mediterranean become a graveyard for their children, who flee a land that once had one of Africa's highest living standards under Gaddafi. And yet, in all of this, Al-Menfi does not resist. He hosts summits. He praises dialogue. But he does not condemn NATO's ruin. He does not speak for African unity. He does not mention the betrayal of 2011, nor call for the reparations owed. Instead, he governs like a man walking on a tightrope strung between Paris and Ankara, careful not to offend the hands that engineered his elevation. To the Pan-African world, Al-Menfi is not a traitor, but a captive, proof that not every betrayal comes from within. Some are worn like suits, spoken in soft tones, and broadcast with the blessing of international peacekeepers. But peace built on foreign control is simply a prison without noise. Libya bleeds. The ancestors call. The people wait. And Mohammed Al-Menfi, whether he knows it or not, stands not as a president, but as a placeholder on a chessboard designed by those who never cared for Africa, only for what lies beneath her soil. 14. Azali Assoumani, the island general who chose silence over sovereignty. Status: still in power. President of Comoros since 2016, previously ruled from 1999 to 2006. The Comoros, a cluster of emerald islands nestled in the Indian Ocean, kissed by tropical winds and ancient African mysticism, should be a symbol of peace and self-determination. But instead, it lives in a strange shadow. A shadow cast not by its own people, but by France, its former colonizer and ever-present master. At the center of this soft colonial grip stands Azali Assoumani, a man in uniform, a leader who bowed where his people wanted him to rise. Azali came to power through a coup in 1999, returned through the ballot in 2002, and then again in 2016, reshaping the constitution in 2018 to extend his hold. Though wrapped in civilian titles, his leadership style has remained firm, centralized, and deeply protective of French interests. While the people of the Comoros cry for dignity, he offers diplomacy. While the youth demand unity with their stolen sibling Mayotte, Azali offers silence. Mayotte, the fourth island of the Comoros, was illegally retained by France after Comoros declared independence in 1975. France simply carved it out, ran a referendum under disputed conditions, and claimed it as an overseas department. For years, Comorians have protested, scholars have spoken, Pan-Africanists have marched. But Azali, the very man sworn to defend the Republic, has treated Mayotte like a taboo, not a cause. Under his rule, France has entrenched its grip on the region. Military agreements, covert surveillance, and border patrols now monitor Comorian seas, not to protect the people, but to stop desperate migrants from reaching their own stolen island. Families are split, babies die in boats, mothers wail, and Azali offers Paris his loyalty. While other African leaders speak of unity and resistance, Azali courts European approval. He signs deals, attends summits, wears the calm face of a moderate. But behind that calm is a betrayal of ancestral blood, of warriors who once believed that Comoros would rise not as a colony in disguise, but as an independent African state. He has jailed dissenters, silenced journalists, and reshaped the constitution to fit his reign. He governs not for the people, but for the system that rewards compliance and punishes rebellion. And as France fortifies Mayotte with military bases and barbed wires, Azali calls it diplomatic complexity. But the children of the islands remember. They remember a flag with 4 stars, not 3. They sing songs about a sea that was once free, not patrolled. And they ask, why does our leader wear medals while we bury dreams in shallow waters? Azali is still in power, but no man can govern forever in the face of forgotten truths. The ocean remembers, the ancestors stir, and soon the tide will rise against the silence. 15. Ismail Omar Guelleh, the auctioneer of the Horn of Africa, status still in power, president of Djibouti since 1999. In the blistering heat of the Horn of Africa, where desert winds whisper the stories of afar warriors and nomadic resilience, lies the small but strategic nation of Djibouti, a gateway to the Red Sea, a stone's throw from Yemen, and a sentinel on the edge of Africa's pulse. Djibouti could have been a fortress of Pan-African might. But under Ismail Omar Guelleh, it has become a showroom of foreign flags, a market of sovereignty, and a chessboard for global empires. Guelleh, in power since 1999, is now among the longest-serving presidents in Africa. He rules not as a revolutionary, but as a broker, selling land, access, and loyalty to the highest bidder. Today, tiny Djibouti hosts the military bases of the United States, France, China, Italy, and Japan. No other African nation has become so saturated with foreign uniforms. And why? Because Djibouti controls the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a choke point through which nearly 10% of the world's trade flows. But this blessing has become a curse, not a benefit to the people. Ports have multiplied, surveillance towers rise, warships dock in rows. Yet in the villages of Djibouti, children go without food, mothers carry water for miles, and youth unemployment crushes hope like sand beneath the boots of foreign soldiers. Guelleh speaks of development, of stability. But stability for whom? His regime is rich in foreign aid, military rent, and international applause, but poor in Pan-African soul. The people see foreign dignitaries flying in to sign deals, while they queue at clinics with no medicine. They see Chinese mega-projects, French commanders, and American drones, but no future carved in their name. And in the age of African awakening, when Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are casting out foreign troops, Guelleh says nothing. When Ibrahim Traoré calls for unity, for resistance, for the African century, Guelleh averts his gaze, for his hands are too tied, his pockets too full. He governs with tight control. Opposition is suppressed. Journalists tread carefully. Elections pass like stage plays, with predictable endings. Djibouti has become a fortress with no voice, guarded by global powers, but silent in its African identity. To the youth of Djibouti, Guelleh is a landlord of empire, a man who rented their homeland piece by piece until only the flag remained. And even that now flies alongside 5 others. The soil is occupied, the seas are monitored, and the sky above is watched by drones. Guelleh remains in power, but the sand shifts beneath his throne, and one day the people will rise, not for China, not for America, not for France, but for themselves. 16. Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the godfather who sold Nigeria's sovereignty for a throne. Status, still in power, President of Nigeria since May 2023. In the beating heart of West Africa lies Nigeria, a giant not only by numbers but by potential. A land of oil, culture, music, and the unshakable will of its people. Nigeria was meant to lead Africa's charge toward economic freedom and political dignity. But in recent years, it has stumbled, not by accident, but by design. And at the center of this tragic script stands a man who once walked among the resistance, but now sits upon a throne purchased by silence and submission. Bola Ahmed Tinubu. They call him the Jagaban, a political kingmaker, a shadowy strategist who built an empire not with vision, but with deals. For decades, Tinubu was the unseen architect behind power structures in Lagos and beyond. He positioned himself as a godfather, a reformer in speech, a democrat in cloth. But when he finally took the presidency in May 2023, after a chaotic, contested election marred by accusations of rigging and elite manipulation, the people saw not a redeemer, but a relic. From the moment he stepped into Aso Rock, it became clear who Tinubu would serve. The Nigerian masses, battered by decades of exploitation, needed relief, but got austerity. His first act? Removing fuel subsidies with no safety net for the poor. Petrol prices doubled overnight. Transport became a nightmare. Inflation soared. Protests erupted. But Tinubu remained unmoved, cheered on by foreign investors, the IMF, and global economic bodies eager to see market reforms, not human well-being. Nigeria, rich in oil and human capital, now dances to the rhythms of Washington and London. Foreign oil companies still dominate the Niger Delta. Contracts flow through elite networks. And while the streets of Abuja and Lagos echo with hunger and discontent, Tinubu travels to France, to Davos, to diplomatic dinners where African pain is translated into business opportunities. And what of West Africa's Pan-African revolution? What of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso? What of the Sahel, where young soldiers rise against colonial relics, where youth chant the names of Sankara and Lumumba? Tinubu did not rise with them. He raised no Pan-African flag. Instead, he stood shoulder to shoulder with ECOWAS, calling for military intervention against Niger's sovereign uprising in 2023. He championed sanctions that choked ordinary people, not to protect democracy, but to guard the empire's borders, to defend neo-colonial interests in the language of law and order. When Ibrahim Traoré defied France, Tinubu said nothing. When Mali expelled foreign troops, Tinubu offered no applause. And when Niger dared to unplug the colonial machine, Tinubu threatened to send in soldiers, not as a liberator, but as a custodian of foreign contracts and Western diplomacy. The irony is cruel. Nigeria, the land of Fela Kuti's rebellion, of Ken Saro-Wiwa's martyrdom, of Murtala Muhammad's courage, now led by a man who wields power with the arrogance of entitlement, not the burden of purpose. He governs with the swagger of a king, not the humility of a servant. The youth are watching. From Lagos to Kano, from Ibadan to Port Harcourt, they whisper his name not with reverence, but with rage. They ask, how did a man who promised power to the people become a shield for the elites? How did a nation so powerful become so voiceless on the continental stage? And what legacy will Tinubu leave? Will he be remembered as the man who reformed Nigeria, or the man who traded her dignity for applause in foreign boardrooms? In the end, his title may be president, but his role in the hearts of Pan-Africanists is that of a gatekeeper to imperialism. Polished, diplomatic, and deeply dangerous. They were supposed to lead us, to carry the banner of Nkrumah, to rise with Sankara's fire, to speak with Lumumba's voice. But they chose another path of comfort, compliance, and colonial continuity. Black Stories Untold is not just exposing names. We are exposing wounds. Wounds still bleeding across the African soil. Wounds caused not by the whip, but by the pen. Not by the colonizer, but by his well-dressed African delegate. So now we ask you, what is your truth? What is your nation's story? Is your leader for the people or for the empire? Drop your country in the comments. Let's create a digital resistance, a map of awakening, a network of memory, a community of courage. The betrayal is real, but so is the rising. Subscribe to Black Stories Untold, because this time, Africa's story will not be written in Europe. It will be carved by the hands of her own children.